Welcome back to Upside Down Data. We need to talk about Injective. So INJ, which is a native token of Injective, seems like it's been in a reaccumulation phase for quite a while, but it was one of the assets that performed extremely well coming out of the bottom of the bear market here in late 2022. You can see just how insanely impressive this rally was that peaked out here in the spring of 24. Over 4,000% move to the upside. Absolutely incredible. But as I said, it's now been taking a break. We've corrected off of those levels, and now we're just kind of chopping along. And we're seeing if potentially the lows back here in August will be the lows of this correction. And then eventually, as we start to slowly grind up, maybe we can get that next wind at some point and send us up higher. So what I want to do is look at both our models and also some on-chain data. That's right, we actually have on-chain data here at the channel for INJ. You're not going to find that many other places. We're going to look at those and see where might INJ be heading next as we are looking to potentially break out to the upside out of this reaccumulation phase. Let's go ahead and get into it. But first, if you want to see live data from our models and more, you can go to our website, polaritydigital.io. And if you sign up for our Polarity Digital Pro plan, you'll get live access to not just our model data, also on-chain data and more for INJ, for Bitcoin, and a bunch of other altcoins. If you're interested, link is in the description. So the first model I want to talk about is our short-term upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. If you've been following the channel, you're very familiar with this model. In brief, it's a risk model. So high values mean high risk, low values mean low risk. And it cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, so shorter in its time horizon. So you can see it does a good job identifying these low risk periods for INJ as well as these higher risk periods for INJ. Now, notably, if we look at what's going on more recently, as we went down into this correction, you'll see, generally speaking, risk trending down. Interestingly, and I think notably, as price has slowly started to move up, basically higher highs, higher lows, we're actually seeing risk now lower at this higher price than it was just even all the way back here. So that means that the model thinks that even though prices are higher than we were here, we're actually at a point where the upside potential is greater than the downside potential, or greater relative to the downside potential than it was even back here, which might end up being the bottom. And that is a bullish sign. Basically, if you're at a higher price, but the odds are more stacked in your favor, there's greater upside potential versus downside potential now, that's a good sign. So does that mean we're just going to shoot off to all-time highs immediately? Absolutely not. But it's a point in the right direction. If you're a bull, you like to see this. You like to see us being at relatively low short-term risk levels right now, even as price has been trending up. That means that from the model's perspective, INJ does have a good amount of room to work with. If it does want to go on a rally, there's a good amount of room there to work with. And then maybe if we chew up some of that upside potential like we did back here, you might cap out, not to say you're going to get to the top of the scale, maybe at this level here around 2 to 3, like we have multiple times now for INJ. That would be a level I would be looking at. But if this were to continue, that's what I'd be looking at. If we see this uptrend continue or a more notable breakout and rally, when do we get to first kind of this general level? That might be the first area to watch as possible resistance. Then after that, getting towards the top of the scale would be where I would be looking at. So we'll have to see if that spark comes. But from a short-term perspective, this is a good sign. You'd much rather see risk down here than it was, for example, back here. Certainly better than up over there. So now let's get into some on-chain data. So what I want to talk about first is the realized price for INJ. So realized price is basically the aggregate cost basis across the entire network. So the idea of realized price is that when someone sells an INJ, someone else buys it. And the person who bought it, whatever price they paid for it, that becomes their cost basis. So the idea is that when you just look at the aggregate realized price, that's basically the aggregate times that people have been selling or moving INJ, what are the prices that people have been acquiring it for? It gives you that sense of what's the overall cost basis for INJ holders at large. So you can see that as we went into the bottom of the bear market, we actually dropped below the realized price. And historically speaking, for a lot of different assets, when you're below the realized price, that is a point of value. That is a deep value zone, and oftentimes is a great time to be acquiring. Sure enough, with INJ that happened, then off to the races we went. Now, the other thing that realized price tells you is selling and where that selling is coming from. So you'll see that realized price has moved up since back over here. And what that means is that people who had bought INJ down here at lower prices were selling for higher prices. And that means that this was getting lost from the average. All of these cost bases were being removed from the average and then being replaced with higher cost bases that were being basically the people who bought up over here. And that will cause the realized price to increase. And the rate of change, how quickly realized price is moving up, tells you a lot about how many people are selling and from what levels. If it's moving up really aggressively, it means that most likely a lot of the people selling were the ones who bought at the lowest prices. So those longer term holders are dumping, they're selling out and being replaced by people who bought up here. If you see, price move up, but only a small uptick in realized price, that might just mean that the people who sold were people who just bought recently, not the people who bought at significantly lower prices. So it tells you a lot about who is selling and how much is being sold at those different levels. And the good news for INJ right now is, though we have seen this trend up, it's not massive. So it suggests that some profit taking has happened already this cycle, but not extreme. And especially as we've entered this reaccumulation zone, you'll notice that the rate of change has basically gone to almost zero. It's basically flat through here, more or less. Very, very little change. Which means that by and large, the people who were going to sell, who had bought at these lower levels, already have. And now we're just seeing new demand potentially come in, or people wanting to accumulate more INJ to set the stage for that next potential leg up. What would be concerning is if you saw a massive spike in realized price, or realized price getting up to what the current price is, because that would suggest that a lot of those people who bought at lower prices have capitulated out. There was a lot of selling, potentially more selling to come, and then you might not be setting that new base. Whereas what we're seeing right now suggests that a lot of that selling has already happened, and now we're setting that new base for potential next leg up. So unless we have a catastrophe or something horrible happen, like a recession or a massive new spike in inflation and a new hike in interest rates or something like that to upset the possible bull market in crypto more broadly, this is a good sign, suggests that we're taking a breather, but might be setting the stage for that next leg up down the road. Now, other data we can look at that can confirm this thinking is looking at the realized profit and loss. So what I'm actually going to do is just show what that looks like overall in the raw aggregate. You'll see it's very spiky, very noisy, just kind of points where people are taking a lot of profit or loss, a lot of whales dumping or buying at different levels. So what I like to do is I like to first normalize it to the price of INJ. This is denominated in USD. This is normalizing it to the price of INJ. Then I like to look at a moving average across 90 days. So this is basically telling us the number of INJ that were moved in profit or loss over a rolling 90-day period. That's basically what this is telling us. And so you can see is that when you get to the bottom of a bear market, you tend to see a lot of selling at a loss. This is capitulation. This is people who bought back in the top of the prior cycle who are now giving up and dumping their holdings. And that tends to mark the bottom of bear markets. But now we went into a bull market. And so zero is all the way up here, by the way. So what you'll see is that though there has been some profit taking, you'll see that up here. In general, as we started moving up here, there was a general trend of a lot of profit taking, but not in a massive quantity or very high magnitude. So there was overall profit taking in terms of just the number of days in which profits were being taken, but not massive in the sense of the actual quantity or the actual amount. So this confirms what we were just talking about with the realized price, that there's been some profit taking, but not a huge amount. So a lot of the people who bought, maybe the people who bought these from these people who are capitulating, some of them have sold, but a lot of them are waiting. And what you'll see is that when these people really start to sell aggressively, this will spike massively to the upside because massive profit will be taken once these people start selling. That has not happened yet. So I think this is a good news overall for the market, for INJ, that we've seen certainly some profit taking, but not a ton. And so when we look at this all together, we can see that longer term holders who maybe have a longer term outlook, more belief in INJ, they are still sticking with it for the most part, or a lot of them are. And the short term, we're seeing some bullish developments. We're seeing risk in the short term being quite low, or relatively low. Certainly for a bull market, getting down below -2 is pretty good. So overall, though this doesn't suggest that we're just going to go on some massive run immediately, it does mean that assuming no catastrophes happen, this is setting the stage. It looks like we're setting a strong base here. Seeing that in the on-chain data. And then that could set that stage where INJ suddenly goes and realizes a lot of that upside potential. And certainly speaking, just in this bull market so far, buying at the risk levels that we're seeing right now has been a great thing over the longer term. So I think it's very, very plausible that we'll look back at this as the exact same thing and say, oh, look, we're down low risk. Of course, that was a good time to buy. Now, that's not financial advice. You should make your own opinions, make of these data as you will. I'm certainly not telling you what you should do or how you should navigate the market. But my own personal evaluation of this is I think the data are pointing to a base being formed and good signs in the short term that could bear fruit, maybe not immediately, but in the coming months or certainly within this year, I think is very plausible. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us over at X. A lot of updates for our models and more over there. And go to our website, partydigital.io, to see live data from our models and more.